At a luxurious party, a black waiter was pushed into the pool, causing the guests to laugh. It seemed that the humiliation would go unnoticed, but everything changed with the appearance of a billionaire who shocked everyone with his act. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The hum of conversation, punctuated by the clink of crystal glasses, filled the air of the sprawling, luxurious venue. The club, known as the Horizon, was the crown jewel of the city's social elite. Owned by Richard Maddox, a billionaire philanthropist and business magnate, the venue represented wealth in its purest, most ostentatious form. On any given evening, its lavish interiors hosted the most exclusive gatherings, with carefully curated guest lists boasting the names of celebrities, industrialists, and aristocrats. Tonight, however, the atmosphere at the Horizon buzzed with a peculiar kind of energy. Guests drifted between the glittering poolside bar and the intricately designed lounges where chandeliers glittered like constellations. The night's event was the pinnacle of the season's social calendar, and everyone wanted to be seen. Among the crowd of servers dressed in crisp white shirts and black trousers was Elijah Brown. At 22 years old, Elijah moved through the scene with quiet determination. His dark, intelligent eyes scanned the room as he balanced a tray of champagne flutes, offering them to the guests with a polite, practiced smile. To the crowd of wealthy elites, he was nearly invisible, a part of the scenery, like the gilded columns or the polished marble floors. Elijah had no illusions about his place in the world. Born and raised in a struggling neighborhood, he'd taken this job to support his family. His mother, a diabetic whose health had sharply declined in recent years, depended on him. His younger sister, Kayla, was just 16 and dreaming of college, a dream Elijah was determined to help her achieve. The Horizon offered better pay than his previous jobs, and every penny counted. As he moved through the opulent space, Elijah could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him. The laughter of the guests felt distant, like a different language he didn't understand. Their casual extravagance, the glittering jewelry, designer suits, and languid confidence was a stark contrast to his own life of budgeting groceries and skipping meals to make ends meet. Still, Elijah kept his posture straight and his expression neutral. He had long since mastered the art of blending in, of performing his duties with an efficiency that made him seem almost invisible. His job wasn't to be noticed, and he took pride in doing it well. The night was progressing smoothly until the arrival of Rust Milner. Rust entered the venue with a swagger that commanded attention. He was the epitome of privilege, tall, handsome, and dressed in a tailored suit that seemed designed to flaunt its expense. As the heir to a massive tech fortune, Rust was used to being the center of attention. Wherever he went, the atmosphere seemed to shift, not because of charisma, but because of the sheer force of his entitlement. Elijah noticed him immediately. It was impossible not to. Rust moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging laughs, his presence magnetic in the worst way. As Elijah approached with his tray of champagne, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. Rust's eyes locked onto Elijah as he neared, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't the kind of smile that invited warmth. It was sharp, edged with something malicious. Elijah felt the weight of that gaze, but kept his expression impassive. "Champagne?" Elijah asked politely, holding out the tray. Rust's smirk widened as he grabbed a glass, but instead of taking it smoothly, he accidentally bumped the tray, sending 2 glasses toppling onto the marble floor. The shattering sound cut through the hum of conversation, drawing glances from nearby guests. "Oh, clumsy me," Russ said, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "Guess I wasn't paying attention." Elijah immediately crouched to pick up the broken glass, his movements swift and practiced. He could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck, but he forced himself to stay calm. "No problem, sir," he said, his voice steady. Rust leaned down slightly, just enough for Elijah to hear him. "You're pretty good at cleaning up messes. I bet that's not the first time you've been on your knees." The comment, quiet enough to avoid the attention of others, hit Elijah like a slap. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep from reacting, refusing to give Rust the satisfaction. As Elijah worked, the murmurs of the surrounding crowd began to fade, and the party resumed its rhythm. Rust straightened, brushing off the incident as though it were a minor inconvenience, and strolled away. But for Elijah, the moment lingered. He rose, clutching the broken pieces of glass, and headed toward the staff area to dispose of them. His mind raced with conflicting emotions, anger, humiliation, and a fierce determination to finish the night without letting anyone see him falter. The party carried on, but for Elijah, it felt like the longest night of his life. The weight of the shattered glass seemed heavier than it should have been as Elijah carried the shards to the disposal bin in the back of the club. The quiet clinking of the pieces against the tray was a stark contrast to the lively music and laughter that filled the main hall. He dumped the fragments carefully, avoiding any further mess, and took a moment to gather himself. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the counter, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He couldn't afford to let his emotions show, not here, not now. The job was too important. He'd learned early on that in places like this, being noticed could either make you or break you, and for someone in his position, it usually led to the latter. Elijah splashed cold water on his face in the small staff restroom, the sensation grounding him. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror. His brown skin gleamed under the fluorescent light, his jaw tight with suppressed frustration. His uniform was still immaculate, save for a few drops of champagne that had landed on his shirt when Rust had knocked the glasses over. With a deep breath, he straightened his collar and returned to the floor. The party was in full swing when he re-entered the main hall. The laughter and clinking glasses seemed louder now, as if mocking him. Elijah adjusted the empty tray under his arm and scanned the room. Guests mingled in small clusters, their designer outfits shimmering under the golden lights. And then he saw Rust. Rust was leaning casually against the bar, surrounded by a small group of admirers. His voice carried across the space, animated and full of self-assured arrogance. Elijah could feel the man's presence like a weight in the air, oppressive and impossible to ignore. Rust's laugh was loud, too loud, as though it were meant to command attention. Elijah kept his distance, weaving through the crowd as discreetly as possible. But it didn't take long for Rust to notice him again. "Hey, you!" Rust called out, pointing directly at Elijah. Elijah hesitated, his heart sinking. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to pretend he hadn't heard, but he knew that ignoring Rust would only make things worse. He turned slowly, forcing a neutral expression onto his face. "Yes, sir?" Rust grinned, and the group around him turned to watch, their interest piqued. "Come here," Rust said, gesturing with a lazy wave of his hand. "I need a refill." Elijah walked over, keeping his steps measured and his posture composed. Rust held out his empty champagne glass, dangling it carelessly between two fingers. "Be quick about it, Cinderella," Rust added, smirking. The nickname stung, but Elijah refused to react. He took the glass and turned toward the bar to refill it. The bartender, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, gave Elijah a sympathetic look as he handed over a fresh glass of champagne. Elijah nodded in silent thanks and returned to Russ's group. As he handed the glass back, Russ's smirk deepened. "You know," Russ began, his tone casual but laced with malice, "it must be pretty humbling to work at a place like this. All these people with more money than you'll probably see in your lifetime. Doesn't that get to you?" The words were a punch to the gut, but Elijah kept his expression neutral. "I'm just here to do my job, sir," he replied evenly. Russ laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that drew more attention from nearby guests. "Right, your job," Russ said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Well, you're doing great. Keep it up." The group around him chuckled, their laughter a chorus of complicity. Elijah felt the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He nodded curtly and stepped back, retreating towards the edges of the room where he could blend into the background. But Rust wasn't done. "Elijah, was it?" Rust called out, his voice carrying across the space. Elijah froze, his back to the group. He turned slowly, schooling his expression into one of polite inquiry. "Yes, sir?" "Come join us for a drink," Russ said, holding up his champagne glass. The suggestion was met with laughter from the group, and Elijah felt his stomach twist. It wasn't an invitation, it was a trap. "I appreciate the offer, sir, but I'm working," Elijah replied carefully. Russ' grin widened. "Oh, come on, live a little, or are you afraid you won't fit in?" The laughter grew louder, and Elijah's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but he knew it would only escalate the situation. Instead, he took a slow breath and forced a tight smile. "Enjoy your evening, sir," he said, turning away. The mocking laughter followed him as he walked toward the staff area, his composure cracking with every step. He felt the weight of every stare, every smirk, every condescending laugh. It was suffocating. In the safety of the back room, Elijah leaned against the wall, his hands trembling. He clenched his fists, willing the anger and humiliation to pass. He thought of his mother, of Kayla, of why he was here. This wasn't about him. This was about them. As he stood there, catching his breath, he heard the faint sound of music and laughter from the main hall. It felt like a different world, one that he didn't belong to and never would. But as much as he wanted to walk away, he couldn't. He wouldn't let Rust or anyone else take away his pride. Straightening his uniform, Elijah prepared to return to the floor. This night wasn't over yet. The main hall of the Horizon sparkled with decadence, its gilded chandeliers casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed crowd. Elijah Brown, having regained his composure after the humiliations of the night, stepped back onto the floor with his tray balanced and posture straight. His movements were purposeful, yet discreet, as though he were navigating a minefield of judgment and condescension. He had barely taken a few steps when his eyes found Rust Milner again. The man had now moved closer to the expansive pool area, where clusters of guests lounged on plush cabanas, sipping cocktails and laughing loudly. Rust stood at the center of one such group, his confident demeanor dominating the space around him. Elijah's stomach twisted at the sight of him, but he pushed the feeling down. He reminded himself why he was here. The pay, his family, the promise of stability for his sister, Kayla, and his mother's medical expenses. These were the reasons he endured nights like this. The infinity pool, a centerpiece of the Horizon, glistened under the soft ambient lights. It appeared to blend seamlessly with the city skyline beyond, an illusion of endless luxury. Guests milled around its edge, their laughter echoing in the cool night air. Elijah continued his rounds, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. He kept his focus on the task at hand, refilling glasses and clearing empty ones, avoiding unnecessary interaction. Yet, as he approached the poolside area, he felt a familiar tension build in his chest. Rust spotted him almost immediately. "Cinderella returns," Rust called out, his voice carrying over the soft strains of jazz playing in the background. Elijah's steps faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, turning toward Rust with a composed expression. "Yes, sir?" he asked, his tone calm. Rust's smirk deepened, and the small group around him turned to watch the interaction with varying degrees of amusement. "Come here," Russ said, gesturing with a finger. "We need some more champagne over here, and maybe a little entertainment while you're at it." Elijah approached, his grip tightening slightly on the tray. Rust held out his empty glass, waiting until Elijah was close enough to take it before deliberately letting it slip through his fingers. The glass hit the ground with a muted clink, rolling to a stop near Elijah's feet. "Oops," Russ said with exaggerated innocence. "Would you mind getting that for me?" The group laughed, their chuckles blending into the background noise of the party. Elijah bent down to pick up the glass, his movements slow and deliberate. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their mockery pressing down on him like a physical force. As he straightened, Rust leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough for Elijah to hear. "Careful now," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Wouldn't want you to trip and fall, or maybe that's just your thing?" The words were like a slap, but Elijah forced himself to stay calm. He met Rust's gaze briefly, his dark eyes steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Anything else I can get for you, sir?" Elijah asked evenly. Rust tilted his head as though considering the question. Then, with a sudden, exaggerated gesture, he stepped behind Elijah and gave him a hard shove. The world seemed to tilt for a moment as Elijah lost his balance. The tray slipped from his hands and champagne glasses shattered against the tiles as he stumbled forward. He tried to steady himself, but the momentum carried him to the edge of the pool. The icy shock of the water hit him like a freight train, stealing the breath from his lungs. He sank for a moment before surfacing, gasping for air. The laughter erupted immediately, a cacophony of jeers and chuckles that echoed across the pool deck. Elijah wiped the water from his face, his uniform clinging to his body as he treaded water. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of humiliation and fury coursing through him. He could see Rust standing at the edge of the pool, his arms crossed and a smug grin on his face. "Come on, it's just water," Rust called out, his voice dripping with mockery. The laughter continued, unabated, as Elijah swam to the edge and pulled himself out of the pool. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though each step required immense effort. Water dripped from his hair and clothes, forming a small puddle around his feet. He bent down to start picking up the shards of broken glass, his hands trembling slightly. The laughter still echoed around him, a relentless reminder of his humiliation. But Elijah kept his head down, refusing to meet their eyes. One of the other servers approached, crouching beside him to help. "Are you okay?" the man asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Elijah nodded, his jaw tight. "I'm fine. Let's just clean this up." The two of them worked in silence, gathering the broken pieces while the laughter gradually died down. As Elijah placed the last shard onto the tray, he straightened and looked out at the crowd. Their attention had shifted back to their conversations, the incident already forgotten by most, but not by Elijah. He carried the tray to the staff area, his soaked shoes squeaking against the polished tiles. Once inside, he set the tray down and leaned against the wall, his head fallen into his hands. The humiliation burned in his chest, but he refused to cry. He couldn't afford to break down. Taking a deep breath, Elijah pushed himself upright and straightened his uniform as best he could. He knew he had to go back out there. The night wasn't over yet, and neither was his job. The laughter that had erupted after Elijah's fall into the pool had long since settled, replaced by the hum of jazz and murmured conversations. To the guests, the moment was nothing more than an amusing interlude in an otherwise unremarkable evening. But for Elijah, it was an event that would echo long after the night ended. As he stood in the staff area, drying off as best as he could with a worn towel, his mind raced. He thought of his mother, who always told him to keep his head high no matter how hard things got. He thought of Kayla, who looked up to him as a source of strength. Their faces grounded him, reminding him why he endured nights like this. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped back onto the floor, his uniform still damp and his shoes squeaking slightly with every step. He avoided eye contact with the guests as he resumed his duties, determined to finish the night without drawing any more attention to himself. Unbeknownst to Elijah, his fall into the pool had not gone unnoticed by everyone. High above the main hall, in a private office overlooking the venue, Richard Maddox had been watching. The billionaire had chosen to observe the party from a distance, as he often did, preferring the quiet of his office to the noise of the crowd. From his vantage point, he had seen everything: Russ's mockery, the push, the laughter that followed. Richard leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as he replayed the scene in his mind. He had built the Horizon as a place of sophistication and camaraderie, not as a playground for the privileged to demean those who worked hard to make their lives easier. What he had witnessed tonight was an affront to everything he stood for. Without hesitation, Richard stood and adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. His decision was made. The moment Richard stepped onto the floor, the atmosphere shifted. Guests turned to look at him, their conversations faltering as they registered his presence. It was rare for Richard Maddox to attend his own events, and his sudden appearance carried an unspoken weight. Elijah, unaware of the commotion behind him, was busy clearing empty glasses from a nearby table when he heard the distinctive sound of approaching footsteps. He turned just as Richard reached the center of the room. The billionaire's gaze swept over the crowd, his expression calm but with an unmistakable edge. His presence commanded attention, and soon all eyes were on him. "Good evening," Richard began, his voice steady and authoritative. "I hope everyone is enjoying themselves." There was a murmur of agreement from the guests, though the air was tense with curiosity. Richard's eyes landed on Rust, who was lounging by the pool with a drink in hand, oblivious to the shift in mood. "Mr. Milner," Richard said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the noise. "A word, if you don't mind." Rust looked up, startled. For a moment, he hesitated, clearly unsure of what to expect. Then, with a forced grin, he stood and sauntered over. "Mr. Maddox," Rust said, his voice smooth but tinged with unease. "What a surprise to see you here." Richard didn't return the smile. "I couldn't help but notice the incident by the pool earlier. Care to explain?" Rust's grin faltered. "Oh, that? Just a bit of fun, nothing serious. The guy tripped. Happens all the time, right?" Richard's gaze hardened. "Is that so?" He turned to the crowd, his voice rising slightly. "Did anyone else see what happened?" The silence that followed was deafening. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some looking down at their drinks, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Richard turned back to Rust. "I watched the whole thing from my office," he said, his tone icy. "You didn't just humiliate one of my staff, you pushed him into the pool, and you thought that was funny?" Rust's face turned red, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Richard's words. I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered. "It was just a joke." "A joke," Richard repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. He stepped closer to Rust, his presence towering. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear. This is my establishment, and I will not tolerate cruelty disguised as humor. If you think your wealth or status gives you the right to demean others, you are sorely mistaken." The tension in the room was palpable. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their earlier amusement now replaced with shame. Richard turned to Elijah, who stood frozen near the edge of the room, his damp uniform a stark reminder of what had transpired. "Come here, please," Richard said, his tone softening slightly. Elijah hesitated, glancing around at the sea of faces now watching him. He took a cautious step forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Richard regarded him with a steady gaze. "What's your name?" "Elijah Brown, sir," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. Richard nodded. "Elijah, I'd like to apologize on behalf of my guest." He turned back to Rust, his expression hardening once more. "Mr. Millionaire, I believe you owe this man an apology." Rust opened his mouth to protest but quickly closed it when he saw the look in Richard's eyes. He turned to Elijah, his voice barely above a mutter. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words were hollow. Richard didn't seem satisfied, but he let it pass. He gestured to a pair of security guards standing near the entrance. "Please escort Mr. Millionaire out of the building," he said firmly. Rust's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "Deadly serious," Richard replied, "and don't bother coming back. You're no longer welcome here." The guard stepped forward, and Rust had no choice but to follow. His departure was met with stunned silence, the once lively party now a tableau of discomfort and unease. Richard turned back to Elijah. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Elijah nodded, though he could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Richard studied him for a moment before nodding. "I'll be in touch," he said simply before addressing the crowd once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I believe this evening has run its course. Thank you for attending, but I must ask you to leave. The horizon will be closed temporarily as I reevaluate the kind of environment I want it to foster." The guests began to disperse, their expressions a mixture of confusion and shame. Elijah watched as they filed out, his mind racing with everything that had just happened. As the room emptied, Richard approached him once more. "You handled yourself with dignity tonight," he said. "That's not something everyone can do in the face of humiliation." Elijah nodded, unsure of what to say. "Get some rest," Richard said. "We'll talk soon." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Elijah standing alone by the pool, the weight of the evening finally starting to lift. The heavy doors of the horizon shut with a resounding thud as Rust Millionaire was escorted out by two stoic security guards. The crisp night air bit at his flushed face, the embarrassment and anger simmering within him. The once confident billionaire heir now stood on the edge of humiliation, cast out from a world he had always thought was his by right. Rust turned back toward the doors, a scowl twisting his features, but the guard stood firm, their silent presence a clear message. His time at the horizon was over. Guests filtered out behind him, murmuring among themselves. Some spared him a quick, pitying glance, while others avoided him altogether, eager to distance themselves from his disgrace. Inside, the remaining staff worked quickly to tidy up the aftermath of the evening's events. Elijah Brown, still damp and exhausted, moved mechanically, collecting glasses and wiping down surfaces. The sharp words of Rust and the mocking laughter of the crowd still echoed in his mind, but a new sense of vindication had begun to take root. The intervention of Richard Maddox had shifted something in the air, not just for Elijah, but for everyone present. For the first time that night, Elijah felt seen, not as a nameless worker, but as a human being. Still, the weight of the evening lingered heavily on his shoulders. Rust paced outside, his expensive loafers clicking against the pavement. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number with quick, agitated movements. "Get the car around," he snapped when the call connected. "Now." The valet appeared moments later, guiding Russ' sleek, black sports car to the curb. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he cast one last glance at the horizon, his jaw tightening. The sting of public humiliation was bad enough, but what burned more was the memory of Richard Maddox's icy rebuke. For someone like Rust, who had spent his life shielded by privilege and wealth, the notion that his actions had consequences was an unfamiliar and unwelcome reality. As Rust sped off into the night, his thoughts churned. How dare Maddox treat him this way? Didn't his family's name mean anything? The Milners were practically royalty in the tech world. Yet, in that moment, none of it had mattered. Maddox had stripped him of his power with just a few sharp words and a steely gaze. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and anger. By the time Rust reached his penthouse apartment, he was seething. He threw his jacket onto the couch, poured himself a stiff drink, and sank into a leather chair, the city skyline stretching out before him. But, as the alcohol dulled his fury, another emotion crept in. Shame. For all his bluster and bravado, Rust couldn't shake the memory of Elijah's face as he emerged from the pool, soaked and humiliated. The thought lingered, unwelcome and persistent, gnawing at the edges of his conscience. Meanwhile, back at the horizon, the staff began wrapping up for the night. The once bustling club was now eerily quiet, the music silenced and the lights dimmed. Elijah finished stacking the last of the glasses and leaned against the bar, his muscles aching and his clothes still damp. A voice broke the silence. "Elijah." He turned to see Richard Maddox approaching, his expression thoughtful but warm. "Sir," Elijah said, straightening instinctively. "You've had a rough night," Richard said, his tone gentler than before. Elijah nodded, unsure of what to say. "I want to commend you," Richard continued. "You showed remarkable restraint and dignity in the face of humiliation. That's not something everyone can do." "Thank you, sir," Elijah said quietly. Richard studied him for a moment, as though weighing his next words carefully. "I've seen many people walk through these doors, Elijah," he said. "Some of them are decent, hard-working individuals like yourself. Others—" He paused, his expression hardening slightly. "Others mistake their privilege for superiority. Tonight was a stark reminder of the kind of environment I don't want to cultivate here." Elijah nodded again, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "I'm closing the horizon for now," Richard said. "It's clear to me that some changes need to be made, not just to this place, but to the culture it represents." Elijah's eyes widened slightly. The Horizon was one of the most exclusive clubs in the city. Shutting it down, even temporarily, was no small decision. "I'll be making some calls in the coming days," Richard continued. "But before that, I want to talk to you about an opportunity." Elijah blinked, taken aback. "An opportunity?" Richard nodded. "I run a series of charitable organizations, foundations that provide resources and support to underprivileged communities. I think someone like you, with your determination and work ethic, could make a real impact there. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you a position." The words hit Elijah like a bolt of lightning. For a moment, he couldn't speak, his mind racing to process what he had just heard. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say you'll think about it," Richard said with a small smile. "No matter what you decide, know this. Your hard work and dignity haven't gone unnoticed. Not tonight, and not ever." Elijah nodded slowly, his chest tightening with a mix of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Richard nodded and extended his hand. Elijah hesitated for only a moment before shaking it, the gesture feeling like more than just a formality. It felt like a promise. As the night finally came to an end, Elijah left the Horizon with a new sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years it felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The weight of the night lingered in Elijah's chest as he made his way home. The streets were quiet at this hour, the city's usual bustle replaced by the low hum of street lights and the occasional whoosh of a passing car. His damp uniform clung to his skin, and his shoes squelched with every step. Yet, despite his physical discomfort, his thoughts were consumed by the conversation he'd had with Richard Maddox. An opportunity. The word hung in his mind like a beacon, both tantalizing and intimidating. What kind of opportunity could someone like him possibly be offered by someone like Maddox? The man was a billionaire, a figure so far removed from Elijah's reality that his generosity seemed almost unreal. When Elijah finally reached the small apartment he shared with his mother and younger sister, he paused outside the door, exhaling deeply. Inside, the faint glow of the kitchen light seeped through the edges of the door frame, a sign that his mother was likely waiting up for him. He pushed the door open quietly, stepping inside to find his mother seated at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. Her tired eyes brightened slightly when she saw him, though the lines of worry on her face were impossible to miss. "Elijah," she said softly, setting her cup down. "You're home late." "Yeah," he replied, slipping off his wet shoes and leaving them by the door. "Long night." She frowned as she took in his damp clothes and the exhaustion etched into his face. "What happened?" Elijah hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "Just work stuff. Nothing to worry about." But his mother wasn't convinced. "You look like you've been through a storm," she said, her voice gentle but probing. He sighed, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "It's nothing, Ma. Just some rich guy making my life harder than it needs to be." Her eyes softened with understanding. "You've been dealing with people like that your whole life, Elijah. Don't let them get to you." "I'm trying," he said, his voice low, "but sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough." His mother reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "It is enough," she said firmly. "You're doing more than most people your age would ever do, and I'm proud of you for it." Her words brought a small, grateful smile to his lips. He squeezed her hand gently before standing. "You should get some rest, Ma. I'll clean up." She nodded, rising slowly from her chair. "Good night, Elijah. Don't stay up too late." Once she was in her room, Elijah leaned against the counter, staring out the small window above the sink. The city lights glittered in the distance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. A future where he wasn't just surviving, but thriving. The next morning, Elijah received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" he answered, his voice cautious. "Elijah Brown?" "Yes, this is him." "This is Richard Maddox." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He straightened instinctively, even though Maddox couldn't see him. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "good morning." "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time," Maddox said. "No, not at all," Elijah replied quickly. "Good," Maddox said. "I'd like to meet with you today if you're available. There's something I'd like to discuss in person." Elijah hesitated, his mind racing. "Yes, sir, I can meet you." Maddox gave him the address of a cafe in the city's financial district, a sleek and modern establishment that exuded quiet sophistication. When Elijah arrived, he spotted Maddox immediately. The man was seated at a corner table, his tailored suit and composed demeanor making him stand out even in a room full of executives and power players. "Elijah," Maddox said, standing and extending a hand as Elijah approached. "Mr. Maddox," Elijah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Please, sit," Maddox said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Elijah sat, his back straight and his hands folded on the table. He felt out of place in his plain button-up shirt and slacks, but Maddox's calm and approachable demeanor put him slightly at ease. "Thank you for coming," Maddox began. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened last night." Elijah nodded, his gaze steady. "I appreciate what you did, sir. Standing up for me like that." Maddox waved a hand dismissively. "It was the least I could do. What Russ did was unacceptable, and I'm sorry you had to endure that." Elijah nodded, unsure of how to respond. "But that's not the only reason I asked to meet," Maddox continued. "I meant what I said about offering you an opportunity. I've been running a series of charitable organizations for years, focusing on education, career development, and community building. We work with individuals who have the potential to make a real impact, and I see that potential in you." Elijah blinked, taken aback. "Me?" "Yes," Maddox said firmly. "You've shown resilience, determination, and a sense of dignity that's rare to find. I think you could bring something valuable to our team." Elijah felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, disbelief, and a flicker of hope. "What would I be doing?" "That depends on you," Maddox said. "We have several initiatives in need of leadership, from mentoring programs to career training workshops. I'd like to start you on a probationary basis, see where your skills shine." Elijah hesitated. "I don't have a degree," he admitted. "I dropped out of college to take care of my family." Maddox nodded thoughtfully. "Your circumstances don't define your potential. What matters is your character and your willingness to work hard, both of which you've already demonstrated." Elijah's mind raced. The offer was more than he had ever imagined for himself, but it also felt overwhelming. "I'll need some time to think about it," he said finally. "Of course," Maddox said. "Take all the time you need, and if you decide to move forward, know that you'll have my full support." Elijah nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. This means more than I can say." Maddox smiled. "You've earned it." As Elijah left the cafe, his heart was lighter than it had been in years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time it felt full of possibility. Elijah walked out of the cafe with a storm of emotions swirling inside him. The sleek city streets around him seemed to blur as his thoughts raced, the weight of Maddox's words still fresh in his mind. A new opportunity. A chance to change everything. For himself, for his family. Yet the idea felt almost unreal, like a dream just out of reach. The brisk morning air bit at his cheeks, grounding him. He stopped at a nearby bench, sitting down to collect his thoughts. The hum of city life continued around him, people rushing to work, cars honking in the distance. But Elijah was in his own world. He had worked tirelessly for years, always moving forward, but never daring to hope for something as transformative as this. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found his sister's name. With a deep breath, he hit call. "Hey, Elijah!" Kayla's bright voice came through, immediately lifting his spirits. "Hey, Kay, how's school?" "It's good. I'm swamped with assignments, but it's nothing I can't handle," she replied. "What about you? How's work?" Elijah hesitated. "It's been a weird couple of days. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something." "What's up?" He took a moment to find the right words. "You know how I've been working all these jobs to keep things afloat, right?" "Yeah." "Well, something happened last night. Someone offered me a different kind of job, a better one. It's through this organization that helps people like us, people who've had to struggle. It could be a chance to do something bigger, something meaningful." Kayla was silent for a moment, and Elijah could almost hear her thinking. "That's amazing, Elijah," she said finally, her voice filled with excitement. "You deserve this. You've worked so hard for so long. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "It's a big change, and I don't want to mess it up." "You won't," she said firmly. "You've got this. And no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Her words brought a lump to his throat. "Thanks, Kay. That means a lot." After they hung up, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He owed it to himself and his family to see where this opportunity could take him. 2 days later, Elijah stood outside a sleek office building in the heart of the city's financial district. The organization Maddox had mentioned, Elevate Foundation, occupied an entire floor. The building's modern glass facade reflected the morning sun, and Elijah couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness as he stepped inside. The receptionist greeted him warmly and directed him to a conference room where Maddox was waiting. Elijah entered to find the billionaire seated at the head of a long, polished table. "Elijah," Maddox said, standing to shake his hand, "I'm glad you decided to come." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Please, have a seat," Maddox said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Elijah sat down, glancing around the room. It was elegant, but understated, with large windows offering a stunning view of the city skyline. "I wanted to give you a better sense of what we do here at Elevate," Maddox began. "Our mission is to provide opportunities for individuals who've faced significant challenges, people who've had to fight for every step forward, like you." Elijah nodded, listening intently as Maddox explained the Foundation's various initiatives. From mentoring programs to scholarships to job placement services, Elevate was dedicated to breaking cycles of poverty and empowering individuals to reach their full potential. "What I'm offering you," Maddox continued, "is more than just a job. It's a chance to be part of something bigger, to use your experiences and perspective to help others. You'd start as a program coordinator, working closely with our team to develop and implement initiatives. Over time, there's potential for growth and leadership. Elijah absorbed every word, his mind spinning. It sounded like a dream job, challenging, meaningful, and aligned with everything he believed in. "I won't pretend it'll be easy," Maddox added. "You'll have a lot to learn, and the work can be demanding. But I've seen what you're capable of, Elijah. I know you can handle it." Elijah took a deep breath, meeting Maddox's gaze. "What made you choose me, sir?" Maddox leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Because I see something in you that I rarely see in others. Resilience, integrity, and a drive to make things better, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. That's what we need at Elevate." Elijah nodded slowly, the weight of the opportunity sinking in. "I'd be honored to be part of this, sir. Thank you for believing in me." Maddox smiled. "Welcome to the team, Elijah." Over the next few weeks, Elijah immersed himself in his new role. He worked closely with mentors and colleagues who guided him through the foundation's operations, teaching him everything from project management to community outreach. One of his first assignments was to help coordinate a workshop for young adults from underserved communities, providing them with career training and mentorship. Elijah threw himself into the work, drawing on his own experiences to connect with the participants. "You remind me of myself," he told one young man during a one-on-one session. "I know what it's like to feel stuck, like the odds are stacked against you, but trust me, you're capable of more than you realize." The young man's eyes lit up with hope, and Elijah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just working to survive, he was making a difference. Maddox checked in with Elijah regularly, offering guidance and encouragement. Their relationship grew from one of mentorship to mutual respect, with Maddox often seeking Elijah's input on new initiatives. One evening, after a particularly successful event, Maddox pulled Elijah aside. "You've done incredible work here," he said. "I've been thinking about how we can expand your role, give you more responsibility." Elijah's eyes widened. "I'm just doing my best, sir." "And your best is exceptional," Maddox replied. "You have a unique perspective, Elijah, one that's invaluable to our mission. I want you to take on a leadership role, overseeing some of our key programs." Elijah was speechless. The idea of leading such important work was daunting, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he'd never felt before. "I'd be honored, sir," he said finally. Maddox smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that." As Elijah walked home that night, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that was entirely new. His journey had been anything but easy, but every challenge, every setback, had led him to this moment. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The evening sky stretched above Elijah as he walked toward the horizon for the final time. It was strange to approach the building that had once been a symbol of inequality and humiliation, now imbued with a sense of closure and transformation. The neon sign atop the building, unlit for weeks since its closure, loomed in the distance, its absence of light symbolic of the change Richard Maddox had initiated. Inside, the club was quiet, devoid of its usual hum of conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses. The gilded interiors and luxurious furniture remained, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. This was no longer the playground of the privileged, but the site of a new vision. Maddox had chosen this evening to bring together a small group of trusted individuals, staff, community leaders, and Elijah among them, to discuss the future of the space. Elijah stepped inside, his heart heavy with memories of the night that had changed his life. He could still feel the weight of humiliation from that evening, the cold shock of the pool water, and the sting of laughter from the crowd. But those memories were now tempered by the opportunities that had followed, the growth, the sense of purpose, and the promise of a brighter future. As he entered the main hall, he spotted Maddox standing near the bar, engaged in conversation with a small group of people. The billionaire looked as composed as ever, his tailored suit impeccable, but there was an added warmth to his demeanor that hadn't been as apparent before. Maddox caught sight of Elijah and raised a hand in greeting. "Elijah," Maddox said as Elijah approached, "I'm glad you're here." "Thank you for inviting me, sir," Elijah replied, shaking his hand. Maddox smiled. "You've earned your place here. Tonight isn't just about closing one chapter, it's about opening another, and you're a key part of that." Elijah nodded, his chest swelling with a mix of pride and humility. He glanced around the room, taking in the diverse group Maddox had assembled. Among them were former staff members of the Horizon, local activists, and representatives from Elevate Foundation. The shift in the makeup of the crowd was striking, a testament to Maddox's commitment to creating a space that prioritized inclusion and community over exclusivity. As the evening progressed, Maddox took the floor, addressing the group with his characteristic blend of authority and approachability. "When I first opened the Horizon," he began, "I envisioned it as a place of connection and celebration, but somewhere along the way, that vision was lost. It became a symbol of excess, of division, and, frankly, of everything I stand against." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "What happened here weeks ago was a wake-up call. It forced me to confront the culture I had inadvertently allowed to flourish in this space. And it made me realize that the Horizon needed to change, not just its operations, but its purpose." Maddox gestured toward Elijah. "Many of you know Elijah Brown. That night, he was treated with a level of disrespect and cruelty that no one should ever have to endure. But Elijah showed us something powerful, dignity in the face of adversity. He reminded us of the resilience and strength that exists in those who are often overlooked." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Elijah. He felt a flush of heat rise to his cheeks, but held his head high. "Today," Maddox continued, "we're closing the Horizon as it once was. But this is not the end. We're reimagining this space as something greater, a community hub that bridges divides rather than creating them. A place where people from all walks of life can come together to learn, grow, and support one another." The room erupted in applause, the sound reverberating off the high ceilings. Maddox stepped back, motioning for Elijah to join him. "Elijah," he said, his voice steady but warm, "I'd like you to say a few words." Elijah froze for a moment, his heart pounding. Public speaking wasn't something he had ever been comfortable with, but he knew this was a moment that mattered. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his gaze meeting the crowd. "I never imagined I'd be standing here," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves. "When I first came to the Horizon, it was just a job, a way to help my family make ends meet. I didn't expect anything more. But that night, everything changed. What happened to me was humiliating, but it also showed me something important. There are people who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's not easy." He glanced at Maddox, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Mr. Maddox saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He gave me a chance to do more than just survive. He gave me a chance to thrive. And now, he's given all of us a chance to make this place into something that matters." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Elijah took another deep breath before continuing. This isn't just about changing a building. It's about changing a mindset, about creating a space where everyone is valued, no matter where they come from or what they've been through. I'm honored to be a part of that. The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the room with a sense of unity and hope. Elijah stepped back, his heart racing but his spirit buoyed by the response. Maddox clapped him on the shoulder, a proud smile on his face. As the night went on, the group mingled and shared ideas for the new vision of the horizon. Elijah found himself at the center of several conversations, his input sought after and respected. It was a surreal experience, but one that filled him with a deep sense of purpose. When the evening finally came to a close, Elijah lingered for a moment, standing at the edge of the empty pool where his journey had begun. The water, now still and calm, reflected the lights above like a mirror. Maddox approached, his hands in his pockets. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how far things have come. It's hard to believe this is where it all started." "It's not where it started," Maddox said. "It's just where it changed, and it's only the beginning." Elijah nodded, the weight of those words settling over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt not just hopeful, but certain. Certain that the future held more than he had ever dared to dream. Together, they walked out of the horizon, leaving behind the echoes of the past and stepping into the promise of a new beginning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Check out our other videos for more inspiring content, and don't forget to share this video with your friends to keep the conversation going. See you in the next one.